Sunday the 20th of March to Friday the 25th of March. And the main theme will be recognition of the crime of ecocide. But more broadly, the problem of climate change. Rise for Climate Belgium, which I represent, is a citizen movement which started here in Belgium in 2018. And we've been fighting and lobbying since then for a stronger European climate policy. So we're very happy today to be joining forces with End Ecocide Belgium and Stop Ecocide International for this campaign to recognize ecocide as an international crime. So we have several distinguished speakers on our panel today. So each one will speak just for a few minutes, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. And our first speaker will be online, and she is Jojo Mehta. She is co-founder and executive director of the international NGO Stop Ecocide International, and she is also chair of the Stop Ecocide Foundation. Jojo?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, our current legal frameworks are inadequate. The recent IPCC report on the impacts of climate change says it clearly. We are not responding fast enough or well enough to the global crises of climate and nature. How can we, when there is no enforceable way to deter and prevent old destructive practices, business as usual, from continuing? These practices threaten not only the environment and communities, but peace and security as well. Recognizing ecocide, acts threatening the worst environmental damage and destruction, is the key missing element in this legal framework. Criminalizing such acts will create the preventive and normative outer boundary guardrail to deter severe harms, strengthen existing laws, and begin to redirect policy and funds in positive ways. In 2021, ecocide was legally defined as unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. It's worth noting that this is framed as a crime of endangerment. It's the act that recklessly threatens severe harm that is the crime. You could think of it as a criminal health and safety law for the planet. This means key decision makers must think very carefully at the earliest stages of potentially damaging projects or policies about environmental, indeed planetary safety at all stages of supply chains, manufacturing and transport protocols and product deployment. There is no question that this legal framing is required if we are to emerge from our current global predicament with a chance of surviving and thriving. European Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans has described this definition as an excellent starting point for legislative discussions at governmental level. And the European Parliament has already voted on several occasions to encourage EU states to support recognition of ecocide. Now, with the 2021 proposal of a revised EU directive on the protection of the environment through criminal law, there is a golden opportunity to introduce this recognition. This will have a strong normative effect. Indeed, in the context of global climate and ecological emergency, this is its essential value. And as we know from the statement issued by the International Corporate Governance Network just before COP26, investors are already beginning to consider risk and governance frameworks in the light of an approaching ecocide law. Many sectors will want to plan and begin implementing strategic changes in order to comply with this essential legal guardrail as it approaches. That is why it's so important to raise awareness of it now. This is a global legal parameter we can no longer afford to do without, and it is rapidly gaining political traction. It is time to remind EU leaders that they must be serious about genuine, enforceable protection of our planetary home and a safer, more peaceful future for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jojo, for the great work that you're doing with Stop Ecocide International. Our next speaker is just as active, but from within the institutions. She is Marie Toussaint, a French environmental activist, a jurist in international environmental law, co-founder of the association Notre Affaire à tous in France, and at the origin of the L'Affaire du siècle campaign. She was elected member of the European Parliament on the Greens EFA group in May 2019. She fights for environmental justice, recognition of the rights of nature, and the crime of ecocide and divestment from fossil fuels. She initiated in 2019 the International Alliance of Parliamentarians for the Recognition of Ecocide. Marie?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Does that work?
Yes.
Yes, great. Thank you. And hello, everyone. Thanks for being here with us today. And thanks also to all the organizations for organizing this press conference, but also the mobilization on Sunday. We are right now living a big crisis at the borders of the EU, and we have a lot of warnings that this war situation is causing a lot of damages to the environment. We're very aware of the impacts that such a war has on the people, obviously, and on nature. But this crisis hides other crises, because while the attention of the world is concentrated on Ukraine, other ecocides are going on and destroying many ecosystems and also many lives of human beings, and of course, non-humans as well. And what we have to do now is fighting against the same systemic causes of those crises, among which the race to possess and exploit the natural resources, and especially fossil fuels. That's what we are seeing, of course, in Ukraine, with a lot of gas issues, of course, but also race to get to the wheat reserves of Ukraine. But this is also what's going on in the Amazonian forests, which keeps on being destroyed at an increasing pace. This is also what's going on not less than 4 oil spills that are going on right now on the coasts of different countries of the world, for instance, in Peru, Nigeria, or Thailand. And this is, of course, what we are seeing with the continuation of the climate crisis and of the destruction of biodiversity and the crossing of many planetary boundaries. And if we don't stop those ecocides, it's very probable. It's quite likely, thank you guys, it's quite likely that we're going to see many rising conflicts all over the world. And that's also why the IPCC told just last week. So we have to fight against many threats, current threats, but also coming threats. And for this, we really need to cut up our ties with fossil fuels and to build a system that is protecting the planet. And that's what the recognition of ecocide is about. As Jojo said, and she stole my pitch, we have a golden opportunity right now with the revision of the directive on the protection of the environment through criminal law that is going on right now. The European Commission presented us last December a proposal that is enlarging the number of acts that could be considered as environmental crimes, but also raising the levels of sanctions and making and pushing for better harmonization and coordination among member states. But it doesn't cross the path, it doesn't cross the barrier of a holistic approach, which is to condemn the attempts to the environment for what it is, because ecosystems have intrinsic values. They didn't do that. They didn't recognize environmental crimes, neither did they recognize ecocide in this in their proposal, in this piece of legislation. And this is where we come up. With the Alliance of Parliamentarians, among which Samuel is one of the first members of parliamentarians, global parliamentarians against ecocide, we are mobilizing in order to push the European Parliament, but also the Commission and the Council to recognize ecocide. We need to do that through the Council, and this is the work of Samuel with Belgium especially, and we have to do that from within the Parliament. And we've been gathering a majority of MPs in the past to ask for the recognition of ecocide at international level, but also to request the recognition of ecocide at internal level in EU law. This is important at a double level because the EU member states make out 1/3 of the members of the International Criminal Court. So this would make a big change, but also because we have ecocides committed on our territory or by companies that are Europeans or by companies that have a large share on the European markets. So if we condemn ecocide in the EU, we would make a change all over the planet. And this is our duty now. So what do we have to do? We are, from within the institution, gathering, as I told you, a majority of MEPs, we hope so, to inscribe the definition and the sanctions of ecocide in the directive that we are only beginning now to study. And we will need, after the Parliament has taken a position, to go and fight with the Council to ensure that this is in the law. So we hope that this will happen, and we really work for that. But we also need the mobilization of civil society. And we need it more than ever, because the Commission is saying right now that, yes, we must recognize ecocide, we must sanction ecocide, and we must prevent ecocide. But that they don't want to do it just now, because the feeling of emergency is not present enough in civil society, because civil society is not mobilized enough for the recognition of ecocide. This is contrary to everything that we are feeling right now, because in France, the Citizen Convention for Climate requested the recognition of ecocide, because in Sweden, the unions and the left parties are requesting the recognition of ecocides, because in Belgium, I will let the Belgians talk, but it's moving a lot and there is a strong support for the recognition of ecocide. And because from what we see from all the petitions that are going on, there is a large support for the recognition of ecocide. So what we have to do right now is to raise our voice and to show them that we are more and more numerous to support the recognition of ecocide, and that we won't let go until this is in our EU law. And that's why I'm really happy to call for the mobilization on Sunday the 20th in Brussels, but also everywhere in Europe. I think that Kim and Chloe will say that. And the more numerous we will be, the more we will be yelling, the more we will be heard. And this is a battle that we can win. So let's go and win it.
Thank you very much, Marie. And our next speaker is also a legislator. And as Marie mentioned, Samuel Kogolati is very active on the issue of ecocide, and he's achieving good results in Belgium. He is a member of the Belgian Federal Parliament. He is vice chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and initiator of the recognition of ecocide in Belgium. Samuel.
Thank you so much for your invitation, and thank you for your mobilization. Really, that is amazing, that is great. And I'm here to tell you that this mobilization works. 2 years ago, we proposed indeed in Belgium the recognition of a new crime of ecocide, not only at the international level, but also at the domestic Belgian level. And I can tell you that 2 years ago, and Marie, of course, remembers, Valérie Cabanez, who was also here in Brussels, also remembers, people thought, well, that is idealistic. That is a beautiful dream, but that will never happen in practice. And after 2 years of very active mobilization from civil society, including, of course, Ecocide Belgium, with the help of Jojo at Stop Ecocide International, I am very happy to tell you that we were finally able, very successfully, to pass with a very large democratic majority in the House of Representatives, just a few hundreds meters away from here. We were able to pass a resolution calling our government to do 3 things. First, to include a new crime of ecocide within our criminal codes. And that is very successful, because there is now a new panel of 3 legal experts, professors of Belgian criminal law, who have been drafting a new legal definition of ecocide for the Belgian domestic context, based on the definition proposed by Stop Ecocide International, and all the amazing work co-chaired by British lawyer Philip Sands. At the second level, and I think that is also very meaningful, Belgium has been pushing for 2 years now for amending the Rome Statute, so the international treaty that founded the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And for 2 years now, our Minister of Foreign Affairs every year in every assembly of states parties calls other states parties to the Rome Statute to change the Rome Statute and recognize a 5th international crime of ecocide. So that means at the very same level of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crime of aggression. And then finally, and that is maybe very peculiar to the Belgian resolution that was passed in December, the parliament was also able to call for the entry into force of a new treaty, a kind of treaty of the coalition of the willing, of the most advanced and progressive states that do not want to wait for the change of the Rome Statutes, because you know that the Rome Statute requires a 2/3 majority. So we also want to go quicker. And I think, and I would like to add a fourth layer to this discussion for this press conference. I think the opportunity to have a recognition of ecocide at the European level is really key. It is an amazing opportunity. And I am here to tell you that if we were successful at the Belgian level, for sure with the coalition of civil society at the European level, for sure we can change things and we can push together at European level for the recognition of this new crime of ecocide. And really, at my very small Belgian level, I really commit to help in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel. And as a citizen movement based here in Brussels, Rise for Climate is really happy to see Belgium taking a leadership role here. Our next speaker is Chloé Micola-Jack. She's the spokesperson for End Ecocide Belgium, a citizen movement that aims to make ecocide a crime in Belgian, European, and international legislations. Chloé.
Thanks, Larry. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. So indeed, today I'll be talking as a spokesperson for End Ecocide Belgium, but also as a youth, climate and social activist, because this is what has brought me into this movement. And this is what I've been dedicating most of my time for the past few years. I often hear, that the time for mobilization, the right time for mobilization was a few years ago, a few decades ago, probably when I wasn't born yet. The second right time is now. So this is why we are doing everything we're doing. This is why we are organizing this week for mobilization for the recognition of ecocide next week, because as has been said by Jojo, by Samuel and by Marie, we need to keep maintaining and increasing the pressure on our policymakers. This is what's missing. The legal framework, the recognition of ecocide is what's missing. We can shout as much as we want on the street as we've been doing, but we've mainly been tokenized by policymakers for the past few years. We've mainly been told that what we're doing is great and that we should keep doing it and that they support us. Yet we haven't really seen the result that we need. And as Jojo has perfectly explained it, is because our legal framework is not correct. It's not made to recognize environmental crimes. A second point that I wanted to make before inviting everyone to join the march next Sunday and the whole week of mobilizations that's going to take place the following week is that we tend to oppose too much, environmental injustices, environmental crimes, environmental damages, and social justice and inequalities. But trust me, these are just two sides of the same coin. As part of the youth movement, as part of civil society and Ecocide Belgium, we see on a daily basis that environmental damages, ecocides all around the world, they affect nature, that's for sure, but they also affect humans. And what we're fighting for at the end of the day, it's a livable planet, absolutely agree, but it's a livable planet for us. At the end of the day, we're fighting for the future of humanity. This is what should be remembered. So to all the cynical that say that we need to oppose both and we can't have both, we can't have a livable planet and we can't support people, I said this is absolutely not true. And we see this on a daily basis. And a final point that I wanted to make is that next Monday is the International Day Against Racism. And we are organizing our march the day before on the same day as a march here in Brussels and all across Belgium that is going to take place to march against racism. And once again, to all the cynical that might say that, these are two very different things, I say no, this is absolutely not the case. Today, every study, every survey made, every investigation shows that the most vulnerable to climate breakdown, the most vulnerable to biodiversity loss, to environmental degradation are minorities. BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, but also minorities from low economic, social background. And so by fighting for the recognition of ecocides, we are fighting against racism, against environmental racism. I think that's a very important point. But we're also fighting once again for a fair and livable future for all, and especially for minorities that historically have been the most affected by ecocide. So this is all to say that I encourage everyone to join our march next Sunday here in Brussels, but also join every event that's going to take place the following week, so all across Europe, but also online, because there has never been a more important moment to mobilize than now. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chloe. And just want to mention that we have synchronized our marches so that you can attend our march against ecocide on Sunday and then immediately join the one against racism. So two great causes on the same day. So our next speaker, I'm happy to introduce my good friend and colleague, Li Quang. He is one of the two co-founders of Rise for Climate Belgium back in 2018. And in his daily life, he is a chess instructor. So Kim, please.
Oui, bonjour à tous. Je vais parler en français parce que mon anglais est un peu trop basique. Mais Larry, si tu veux traduire ou faire un petit résumé après hein, pour les anglophones. Donc voilà, donc nous on est un collectif citoyen et d'artistes qui habitent en Bruxelles. Et en fait, depuis 4 ans, voilà, on organise des mobilisations autour des institutions européennes, puisque c'est un peu notre devoir, hein, elles sont à Bruxelles. Et donc voilà, on a fait des grandes marches, notamment pour défendre hein, les revendications du climatologue Jean Jouzel et de Pierre Laroutourou, qui est devenu député européen entre-temps, voilà, pour un pacte finance-climat, donc un vrai Green Deal depuis 4 ans. Et en fait, on a aussi organisé des mobilisations pour l'Amazonie et contre le traité Union européenne-Mercosur. Et c'est comme ça qu'on a pu rencontrer Ecocide Belgium et Stop Ecocide. Et voilà, on a décidé, en fait, après avoir été mis au courant de cette révision de la directive sur le droit pénal de l'environnement, on a décidé de soutenir cette campagne parce que voilà, en tant que citoyen, on voulait vraiment aussi avoir des débouchés après nos manifestations, parce que vous savez, les institutions européennes, c'est une grosse machine. Même après notre marche là des 70 000, on n'a pas toujours bien trouvé les interlocuteurs, mais voilà. Donc, en tout cas, on a déjà ça. Et alors l'idée aussi, c'est que on sait que les textes qui sont discutés au sein de l'Europe sont souvent sous influence de lobbies. Et ce texte va sûrement déranger les grandes multinationales qui n'ont pas envie d'être sanctionnées. Et donc, c'est important que les citoyens s'allient aussi avec les juristes, les élus, les ONG qui défendent voilà, la reconnaissance de l'écocide. Voilà, donc voilà, ça, c'est une des raisons. Et alors aussi, voilà, depuis 4 ans, on s'est allié avec les jeunes. Hein. On a co-organisé la première grève mondiale il y a 3 ans avec eux. Et la grève mondiale a lieu le vendredi 25 mars. Il y a la journée mondiale de l'eau le 22 mars. Vous savez que le réchauffement, le dérèglement climatique, les gens ne vont pas forcément mourir de chaud, mais ils vont surtout mourir de soif et de faim, d'un manque d'eau potable. Et ça concerne peut-être des milliards peut-être de personnes. Et donc voilà, on devait absolument se bouger. On essaie aussi de suivre les conseils européens. On aimerait qu'en fait, qu'avec l'urgence climatique, que dans tous les conseils européens, le climat, les écocides soient à l'ordre du jour. Et donc, on sera là encore le 24 mars dans la semaine pour interpeller le Conseil européen. Voilà. Et puis le 25 mars, on soutiendra la grève mondiale de Fridays for Future. Voilà. Alors, je voulais excuser aussi Lucie Moreau, qui est de Youth for Climate, qui ne peut pas être là. Elle est malade, donc ils n'ont pas eu le temps de trouver un remplaçant. Mais voilà, si vous avez besoin de leur poser des questions, on peut vous donner leurs coordonnées. Merci.
Thank you, Kim. So just to briefly summarize, so as he says, we are a citizen movement, which we've been fighting now for 3 years for climate policy. But of course, climate is an extremely broad topic. And so in the course of our action, we have been supporting a movement here in Brussels, which is fighting to protect the Amazonian forest. And that is certainly a great example of an ongoing crime of ecocide, the deforestation and the destruction of the rainforest. And through that connection, then we were able to team up with End Ecocide Belgium. And so that's great that we are now able to make that link. And Kim also emphasized the fact that during this week of action, there will be on the 22nd of March, it's the annual World Water Day. And so we will be organizing an event to emphasize the importance of access to drinkable potable water. And then on Friday, the 25th of March, it will be the next Global Strike for Future, organized by the Fridays for Future movement and its Belgian chapter, which is Youth for Climate. And unfortunately, the representative of Youth for Climate, Lucy, could not make it here today, but we work very closely with Youth for Climate, so we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And so now I'm very happy to introduce Pierre Galland, who is very well known in Belgium as a former politician, but mainly as a co-founder of several NGOs active in solidarity with people in developing countries and with persons deprived of their freedom. And among his many leadership roles, he was Secretary General of Oxfam Belgium from 1967 to 1996. And after Pierre, we'll also hear from Ricardo Petrela, and I'll introduce him afterwards. So Pierre, please.
Thank you very much. And I will speak in my very bad English. I remember that in 73, during the African disaster on water, there was 10 years without drain. The first time we employ in Oxfam this term ecocide. And it came because we observed that in the country, I was in Niger, in Arlit, you have Areva that you know well. Areva was doing work to find water, and they make a deep drill to find water. When they find water, they employ this water to clean the uranium. And having cleaned the uranium, they were delivering the water to the Tuareg population, saying, we are also looking for the welfare of this population. It was with water coming from uranium. And the same years, Texaco was looking for oil in the country. And they were there with big drill machinery. And I went to meet them, and I asked them to make sure that they can find water for the population. And they said, it's not in our mandate. But after that, the man in charge of this drilling system, he tell me it's a catastrophe, because when we are drilling, we pass through water to find the oil in the deep country of the soil. And when we don't find good oil, we take all the material out, and all this oil pollute the water that we have crossed in between. So that's ecocide. That's a real ecocide, and that's the responsibility of a lot of multinational, not only the multinational in charge of water in the world, but also this kind of multinational looking for their interest only, without to take in account the real welfare for the population. And that's the reality today too. You speak about billion of people, and we know that more than 1/5 of the population today don't have water. They don't have water, and half of the population have water, but this water is not drinkable. So that it's a real problem, and for this reason, it's clear that we try to denounce the fact that today water is as a product, as a natural product, is inside les bourses. How do you say les bourses? The stock exchange. Merci. It is coming in the stock exchange as something that you can manipulate it, and you can do like with oil product, another product, and we observe that like in Ghana today, some of these multinationals have built reserve of water, waiting that the price will be higher to deliver the water. It's speculation on water. And you know that in Belgium, we have a very nice and big professor in Louvain, Bichara Kader. he was speaking about the new war on or bleu, on the blue goals. And I believe that for this reason, there is a need, and I am so happy to be here to support you in this work, to make sure that the ecocide would be one of the crime against humanity tomorrow, because it's a crime against humanity. And we know it, but never till now we have obtained the fact that it will be our international law like it was for genocide. And I believe that ecocide, genocide, and sociocide must be taken account today. So that I am very happy to be with you today and to say that the 22, in fact, you are welcome à la Bourse, in front of the Bourse, because we will protest against this manipulation, this speculation on water in the world today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. And the example you gave of Texaco is a perfect way to show the link between ecocide and climate change, because Texaco extracting fossil fuels, which will then contribute to global warming, is also depriving people, local people, of access to drinking water. So now our last speaker, who I hope is online with us, is Ricardo Petrela. He's an Italian political scientist and economist. He is professor emeritus at the University of Louvain, UC Louvain. He is a member of the World Social Forum and the Porto Alegre Manifesto, and a co-founder of the Agora of the Inhabitants of the Earth. So do we have...
Yes, good morning
Ricardo,
to everybody. Thanks for inviting me, and I thank also Pierre Galland to remind us that the most critical forms of ecocide today is increase in shortage of water for human use. And in line on what he just said, let me just put the point on the two conditions that, to my mind, must be implemented in order that the fight against ecocide could become effective and permanent and stable. The first is the fact that today appropriation of nature, of life, by financial groups, I mean, for instance, BlackRock investment fund, is more and more strong, wide, and accepted by political institutions and public political authorities. And recently, the Wall Street has decided to impose that all natural elements of the planet should be considered financial assets. And therefore, they created the new category of enterprises called natural assets corporations that are starting now to be in operation over the world and working on all elements of nature, and not only water, but everything which is natural. Under the assumption, very false assumption, that the private appropriation of natural elements will expand and improve the capacity of conservation, of safeguarding and care for the future of nature on the planet. This is calling the nature pricing principle. And this means that if we don't abolish the existence and we consider illegal the existence of the NACs, the natural assets corporations, there will be no stop to ecocide. And the second is that referring to stock exchange role in managing and governing the life on the earth, let me remember that today, one major obstacle to stop the devastation and destruction of life human and natural life on the planet is the private patent on living organisms. If we don't abolish the right to patents on living organisms, on seeds, on microbes, on cells, on plants, animals, human beings, we can really continue to talk about the fight against ecocide. We must stop the finance sovereignty on life on the earth. We must stop the trusting the future of life on the planet to natural assets, corporations. That would mean that we would have entirely abdicated to the power of financial private groups. Many, many thanks and have a nice day.
So before we take your questions here in the room and online, just to quickly remind you of the agenda of our week of action. So on Sunday 20th, next Sunday, we will be gathering at Place Luxembourg, so right across from the European Parliament, starting at 12:30. And then around 1 o'clock, 1:15, we will start our march and proceed to Schumann. And there we will assemble, and there will be short speeches to the crowd gathered there. And so that's Sunday. And as I mentioned, then we will, of course, encourage people to follow by going to the March Against Racism, which takes place in the city center. Then on Tuesday the 22nd, as Pierre and Ricardo mentioned, we will be at the Bourse. I think it's at 12:30 in the afternoon to fight to demonstrate for access to water. And then on the 24th, Thursday the 24th, there will be the summit of the European Council. And so as Rise for Climate does practically every time there is a European summit, we will be there to show our presence and to pressure members of the European Council, the heads of state and government of the EU member states, to be more ambitious in their climate policy. And of course, on this occasion, to ask for the recognition of ecocide. And then finally, on Friday, there will be, I think it's at 1:30 in the afternoon, the Global Strike for Future. So all school kids and students will be assembling there to go on strike and to march. The theme for this global strike is people, not profit. And of course, it's not just students. Everyone is welcome, and Rise for Climate, as we always do, we will be there in numbers to support them. Oh yes, I should also mention that it's not just in Brussels that actions for the recognition of ecocide are taking place, but in several European cities. So let's see, we have Paris, Rome, Madrid, Amsterdam, Bremen, and Strasbourg. And I'm sure that if you have questions about those actions taking place in those cities, that our friends here from End Ecocide and Stop Ecocide can answer that. So with that, I'd like to now take questions. And we already have one question which comes from an online journalist. It's Gilles Toussaint of the Belgian newspaper La Libre, and he's asking which governments are the most reluctant at the EU level, and what are their arguments? So I think probably Marie is the best person to answer that.
Yeah, I might be. Thank you. Thanks a lot to everyone. I will answer Mr. Toussaint, which is tricky for me since we have the same family name, isn't it? So I don't know where I have to look. I think it's here to answer you. The thing is, I cannot tell right now who are the countries that are opponent to the recognition of ecocide as governments. I'm talking about governments, right? Because up to that point, nobody dares saying I do oppose the recognition of ecocide. And that's quite fortunate. This shows that we have a door, you know, or maybe a window, but that is here and that we have to open, because nobody is assuming right now, going up to public opinion and saying, I don't want the recognition of ecocide. So what we have, I would say, is three different categories of country. One, the country, and this is not in plural, this is in singular, the country that is already working for the recognition of ecocide is Belgium. And we have this country being pretty much active on the international stage, as Samuel Kugoletti said. And we need more to go in this category, and we are pushing them to come up. Then we have, I would say, a second category of countries within the European Union, which is a bit diversified, because we have, for instance, France, who took up the word ecocide and put it into its law with a complete different meaning of what it is really. So they pretend that they support ecocide, they even pretend that they support it at international level. It's been more than 3 years now that the president and the government are saying this, and we don't hear them nowhere, and especially not in the ICC, whereas Belgium has been taking an official position. And on the other side, we also have Sweden and Finland, for instance, who are discussing the recognition of ecocide among their parliamentarians and with the unions, as I said before. So we see that there is a move in the direction of the support of ecocide. And we have other countries, such as the Netherlands, but even more Spain, because Netherlands, well, we'll see what the government will do, but there are moves inside of the parliament. And in Spain, we have a lot of movement at the moment. We had the first call for the recognition of ecocide that was adopted in the parliament. And we will have also discussion over the recognition of the rights of nature, of the rights of Marmena, that will be going on in the coming months now. So we see that Spain is a country that is moving. And I can maybe, I think, say the same about Portugal, which never said we support the recognition of ecocide, but the former government, which is, and the Minister of Justice, that was socialist, so it's kind of the same, you know, affiliation with the current government, has been saying that we really need to improve our penal environmental law if we want to protect the planet, and I expect them to be on the right side during the discussion. And then there is a third category of governments that just say nothing. So we don't know. And I don't really think that countries will say, we really don't want ecocide, because that would be too much denial of the environmental situation, of the damages that are caused to the ecosystems, and of the violations of human rights that are caused by the ecocides that are committed in the EU and throughout the planet. So I don't expect them to say that. I expect them to say again, I mean, the opponents, to say again that this is too complicated, that despite the fact that we have a very solid proposal coming up from the panel that Jojo Meta was talking about before, that despite that we have this definition that is really solid, that this is not precise enough to be penal law, that, you know, we need to talk about it, but this is not the right moment. So it's going to be after, when we don't know, but, you know, this kind of arguments that will be bad arguments. But I also know that governments and members of parliament throughout the EU didn't really know what ecocide was about only 2 years ago. And Samuel said how much movement we've made in the past 2 years. So I also expect them to, you know, learn what it is and begin to realize what it would be about. And just to finish with that, I also want to say that companies are moving. And during the COP26 in Glasgow, we had a very big surprise while opening a letter from big investors, among which big banks that are financing fossil fuels and ecocide throughout the world, but saying, hey, we need to act more for the climate. This we hear for a bit of time now, but also we want the recognition of ecocide now. And this is a big change. I'm very surprised, and I hope that they will be with us during the negotiations. But some banks like BNP, for instance, and their asset management units that said, we want the recognition of ecocide. Well, what I know is that also things are moving in the economic sector. And a lot of firms are now considering that if they do some efforts, then those who don't do efforts must face their responsibilities. And that's also what is pushing the economic sector in favor of the recognition of ecocide, so that we also ensure the level playing field, as we say in the EU bubble.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marie. Now I'm happy to, or unless someone else wants to add anything, no? Happy to take questions from the room. Yes.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. I've been following this issue of ecocide for some time now in the Brussels Times. Okay, hello, my name is Moses Appelblad from the Brussels Times. And I would like follow-up questions to start with Marie. I mean, we're talking about, let's say, this golden opportunity, let's say, to go forward, and also about support we're gaining in different countries. I know that you established this, let's say, international parliamentary alliance. And you talk just now about, let's say, the different categories of countries in the European Union. But I suppose there is a difference between, let's say, governments and parliaments. Take your own country, France. I mean, as you said that you didn't take it serious. It was only pretending. Could that be because, after all, there is a strong, let's say, cooperated lobby? I mean, against ecocide. I mean, Total and other companies who are committing ecocide now. What is your comment on that? But my question is, I mean, what is the support? I mean, among parliaments, not only in Europe but also around the world. I mean, for legislating against ecocide. That is my question. And just a small follow-up question, which also has linked to the new, let's say, EU directive on protecting of the environment through criminal law. I suppose it will include both corporate and individual responsibility. But as far as I know, I think that, let's say, the proposed definition by the Stop Ecocide Foundation to amend the statutes of International Court of Crime is only, let's say, is only corporate responsibility. No, let's say, what did I say now?
But we understood.
Yeah, exactly. And what is your opinion about that? I mean, should also individuals be held responsible, I mean, for these crimes? So, in order for the legislation to be effective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But the first question, I think that there was a lot of questions in the question, so I don't really know how to address it, but I said it a bit before. I think that those who will oppose, frankly, I'm not sure there will be many, as I said, but others will, you know, slide like a serpent. I think there are different reasons for that. When we talk about the French Parliament, the French government, and I think I can say the same, but the Commission only a few months ago, we talk about ecocide, they don't know what we're talking about. And we have a huge weakness regarding, and this is a main issue, regarding the number of knowledge on environmental law. I mean, we don't have, or we have very few lawyers in environmental services in different kinds of governments. And on the other side, in the ministers of justice or the DG Justice, we have very few people having a knowledge on environmental issue. And it's the same in the judicial system as a whole. We have very few lawyers, judges, prosecutors that really know about the environment. So this is something that we have to change. And this is pretty much incredible that we are still at this stage when we have been working and creating international environmental law and environmental law throughout the EU since the 70s. We have lost so much time. So there is a big issue of knowledge on what's happening and what to do. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's taking so long. They might be, on the contrary, one of the reasons why we might win this battle. But we'll see that. Second thing is, of course, there is an issue of lobbying and economic forces that do oppose criminal law. They feel like they are having a lot of administrative burdens when it comes to the transition. And they are frightened of also being at risk of being sued criminally for their actions regarding climate and the environment in general. So we have those figures that are lobbying against our proposal. And I, for instance, do expect Business Europe, which is chaired by Frenchmen, going against the recognition of ecocide. That I do expect. And that's why it's so important that some of the big economic actors are, taking position in favor, and because we will need everyone to mobilize to win in this fight. So of course we have this role of the lobby, but there is a last reason why it's pretty much difficult for the governments to agree to the recognition of ecocide, and that's really linked to your second question, because yes, the recognition of ecocide would also endanger them as governments, as leaders, for the actions that they take or don't take regarding the protection of nature. And this is one of the main issues. And if we think about it, it also has a lot of consequences. For instance, what do we do with people who are obviously responsible for ecocide, such as Jair Bolsonaro? What's the sanctions that we can have against him? So we have the International Criminal Court for that, and we always envisage, we always look at peaceful solutions. But of course, this raises this kind of issues, and some European leaders also might be frightened of being in front of the justice for their action or inaction regarding nature, such as they have been because of the climate litigation movement in many countries now throughout the EU, and we win those cases. So they may also be frightened of that. ICC is indeed about individuals, and that's how it was built. And for years, we've been pleading for the recognition of ecocide within the Roma Statute, and we needed this definition. But what we would also need, ideally, would be to have a democratization of the ICC with more possibility for civil society, would they be NGOs or others, to seize the International Criminal Court, but also for the International Criminal Court to be able to sue, would it be government or companies? But right now, what we need is the recognition of ecocide at ICC level. In European law and in national laws, this is a bit different because we do have already, in the EU, provisions for the criminal responsibility of companies in front of the law. And this is, of course, where we push so that we can have sanctions that are at the good level, but adapted for companies. So for instance, in the proposal of the Commission right now on environmental crimes, it's up to 3 to 10 years of imprisonment, but it's also, and I think this is best, about blocking the actions of a company, being able to seize some of their assets, stop some projects that are being real bad, and also maybe stop the living of a company and its activities. And this is where we really need to push. And then behind that, we also need the responsibility of the individuals within the companies, because we also have individual responsibility in the leading of the companies. So we need to be there everywhere, actually.
I just want to add something to that. I think that's a critical question. Really, the matter of legal definition and of personal scope of the new incrimination is extremely important. It is really key, because you can, of course, and as Marie said, for example, in France, You can talk of ecocide as a buzzword, as a, just a slogan, and it sounds beautiful, and you can use it in political discourse, but without any impact on the ground. And I think what we have in common here is that we really want, to change the law in order to have an impact on the field, really to have an impact against mass destruction of the environment. And of course, if you decide to restrict the scope of ecocide only to a few individuals, I think, at least at the domestic and even EU level, you will miss the point. And so I talked to you about the resolution that was passed in Belgium very successfully in December, but we also have tabled a bill, une proposition de loi. That bill is public. And that bill makes very clear, explicit, that it not only applies to individuals, but also to personnes morales, so also to companies and corporations. And I think that is important to mention. That is also the reason why I plead not only in favor of having, this moral element, this moral requirement of deliberate acts, as in the case of the crime of genocide, but simply to have the knowledge that, the acts and the damage to the environment can actually happen. I think that is important because you will rarely find corporations which, decide to pollute the environment because they like it. No, what will happen most of the time is that, they are capitalistic agents, and in order to, have more money, they will decide to invest less in the protection of the environment with grave effects on the environment as a result. But so that question is really important. And also just to complete, there are some political parties which have constantly opposed the criminalization of ecocide. And I've seen that in Belgium, in all our debates for 2 years. Some debates were, sometimes very violent. I mean, politically, but very violent. And that was all the time against the far right, but also the nationalists of the right in Flanders. And I've had those debates with them. And but I think we also should take it as an honor, to be able to see that there is also a very large majority of democratic parties, including on the right and liberal parties, which do support this recognition of a new crime of ecocide.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And,
I wonder if I might come in briefly there. Is that all right? Just to say that the individual focus of the ICC on key decision makers is actually very important. And of course, it's going to be important at some point also to target corporations. But one of the things that's so powerful about individual responsibility is that in the current situation, of course, it is actually people who are making the decisions within companies to engage in destructive projects. And any kind of legal repercussions will simply end up being dealt with by the company in the form of fines and so on. And so effectively, those people are not being held accountable. And so creating a criminal law that does focus on individuals is actually really important, because if you're looking to deter and prevent, then having those people thinking before they sign on the dotted line for a project about the potential implications on their personal freedom, you're actually looking at something that has a very strong capacity to change behavior. And in fact, research has shown that when you change environmental regulation, what you tend to change is corporate budgeting. Whereas when you introduce a criminal element, which can affect individuals, you're then looking at a change in behavior. And so that's actually a very important place to start.
Thank you, Louise Guillot for Political Europe. I have 2 questions, mainly for Marie-Toussaint, but also Chloe, if she comes back. You mentioned at the very beginning of the press conference, the war in Ukraine. I was wondering, how is that changing or affecting your campaign on the recognition of ecocide? Do you plan any, focus specific on the war? and what's happening there and the impact on the environment? And second question, how close are you from getting this majority in the European Parliament you were referring to include ecocide in the revision of the Environmental Crime Directive? Thank you.
Merci, Louise. I will begin back the last one, then I will come back to the first one. How close are we? I don't exactly know. We'll see. We've been winning, 6 times. We've been getting majority 6 times for the recognition of ecocide at international level, twice on the fact that we need to integrate ecocide in EU law. So normally, if the parliamentarians hold up to their words, they're supposed to largely vote in favor of the recognition of ecocide. This is not always what happens. So we have a bit of suspense. However, I think it's going to be a fight of definition. I believe that if we have a restrictive definition, that's how I would say it, of ecocide, then we win, definitely. If we have an ambitious definition of ecocide, there it will be more tricky. What I know for now is that the political divide is pretty much the same as it was before, which means the left parties will overwhelmingly vote in favor of the recognition of ecocide. I expect the right wing to vote against, and then Renew is key. But we have in Renew a lot of allies as well. We have some in EPP as well. And we are right now trying to push for 3 different things, actually. The recognition of ecocide, of course, which is the aim of this conference, but also environmental crimes, which will be even more difficult. And last thing, a green prosecutor, which is something that a lot of MPs have been requesting now. So if we ally those who are in favor of the 3, we have normally a majority, but this will be to see during the discussions, right? So we'll see that. And on Ukraine, this is a tricky situation for all of the climate movements, and especially in France with the presidential elections coming up. We're having a hard time talking about long-term issues, which we believe are present-term issues, but for a lot of media and politicians, it's still long-term issues. We're saying, no, it's now, but discussion going on. And saying the climate emergency is absolutely urgent, which can seem natural, but it's not always for the people, and the destruction of the planet and the crossing of the planetary boundaries are have the same emergency, right? But then everyone says, okay, there is a war in Ukraine. We are now facing new challenges, and how will we ensure that we have access to gas and to wheat and to soya if we have to replace, so we can also have damages on the Amazonian forest because of the crisis in Ukraine, So what we have to say is only to remind that the very same economic system and political system that is leading to conflicts as in Ukraine are the same economic and political system that are also leading to the destruction of the planet, and that those crises and those conflicts and those victims will still be here if we don't face also these long-term or present-term emergencies.
Could you repeat the question for Chloe?
So the question that Marie just answered as well was just directed to Chloe on, how do you see the war in Ukraine affecting the campaign for Stop Ecocide? Whether you can focus specifically?
we're not planning to focus on it as such, because as said, I think by Marie, and I said during my first intervention, is that all issues are intertwined, and you have to see, I think, environmental issues, and I think that's a criticism to the Green movement that I make, but as I'm very aware of it, is that the Green movement for a very long time, and I'm not saying just the political, but also the NGOs, we've been looking at environmental issues as separate from social issues, and something that was very much about individuals. And in the last few years, and I think mainly thanks to the voices of the Global South that are increasingly heard, we now understand, I mean, some might have understood before, but it wasn't very obvious, that everything is intertwined. And as Mary mentioned, we have an economic system and a political system that is based on exploitation and on extraction of both nature and human. And until we're serious about tackling this, and this is why ecocide is so important, because it would provide a legal framework that we currently don't have, until we are able to recognize this and tackle it via the right measures, including ecocide, we won't be able to tackle any of these issues because they're not separate, they're very much linked. And this is the case also with conflict in Ukraine, but also all around the world. So tackling one without the other wouldn't necessarily make sense, hence the importance of ecocide, I think.
Juste un commentaire. Oui, la plupart des activistes, et même ici, on a participé à des manifestations pour la paix et contre la guerre en Ukraine. Et voilà, il y a quelques jours, Promo Ukraine nous a contactés parce qu'ils sont intéressés de s'associer avec notre action du 20. Donc, on va leur donner la parole, notamment par rapport au bombardement des centrales nucléaires, etc. Donc, voilà, c'est pas encore totalement défini, mais voilà, on ouvre la porte aussi pour leur parole.
Moi, je voudrais revenir un instant sur ce que disait Samuel. C'est travaillons pour que le crime de génocide entre dans le statut de Rome. Parce que, d'écocide, pardon, le génocide y est déjà, il faut rentrer l'écocide, dans la mesure où c'est vraiment une des façons de permettre de combattre cette situation actuelle, par exemple, la guerre qui se passe au Yémen, la guerre qui se passe en Syrie, la guerre qui se passe en Ukraine. Je crois qu'il y a là vraiment un souci à avoir. Donc, essayons de pousser les juristes à travailler pour qu'on puisse, avec l'appui de la société civile, nous tous, faire entrer la notion d'écocide et le crime d'écocide, pas la notion, le crime d'écocide à l'intérieur de ce statut de Rome. Je crois que c'est une des façons aussi d'avancer.
No, I completely agree with that. And I think the war in Ukraine has made the International Criminal Court more relevant than ever, actually. You know that the prosecutor has opened an investigation against crimes against humanity and war crimes in Ukraine. Just imagine for a moment that there would be a fifth crime of ecocide. I think it would be clear that the ICC would now be prosecuting that crime also on the fields in Ukraine. And of course, I think, you know, just when you think of targeting a nuclear power plant as a military target, it's not only a war crime sanctioned under Article 56 of the first Geneva Protocol, but also, of course, a crime of ecocide, because you realize that you can have a huge impact on future generations with mass, you know, radioactive contamination.
So we have a question here. Yes, we'll have to keep short questions and short answers, please, because we're running.
Right. Robert Hodgson for ENDS Europe, the Environmental News Service. Much of what I wanted to ask has just been answered, but I'm going to ask Madame Toussaint to go into slightly more detail about the procedure in the European Parliament. The rapporteur has been named. It's an EPP member for the Environmental Crime Directive. Have you named your own rapporteur yet for the Greens? That's one question. And is the choice of an EPP rapporteur cause for concern, given that we were talking about some parties being more resistant to, you know, codifying the crime of ecocide in law? And if I may, a quick question for Mr. Kogolati, who perhaps is in the best position to answer this. There's an Environment Council on Thursday, where the Commission is scheduled to share information about the directive, the proposal on environmental crime. Do you know if there's anything afoot within the Belgian government to try and push the agenda further, or is it too early to, is there an alliance likely to form, or you know what I'm driving at? So.
So on the European Parliament, a rapporteur was named, but there is still a conflict of competence between the committees. So we're trying to sort that out, and then we will have a calendar. For the Greens, surprise, it's going to be me. But I won't be alone, because there are many committees that are already there or will come into the discussion. Which is, of course, the Libe committee that is disputing the coordination of the file by Yuri. I don't expect them to win, but let's see. Because it's clearly written that it is in the competence of the Yuri committee, right? So there might be Libe with some kind of close association to the work. And there, I cannot say who it's going to be yet, but I know that another Belgian, Saskia Brikmont, will be leading for the Greens on this file in the Libe committee. Then we will have opinions from the Petty committee, where normally it's Renew that will be in charge. And this is pretty good news, because they are really active in this committee. We're going to have opinions from the DEVE committee, and there is going to be Caroline Rose, and Saskia Brikmont and Caroline Rose are both members of the International Alliance for the Recognition of Ecocide. There will be opinions from Envy, of course. There is going to be me again. And there might be other committees that I'm forgetting, but I think it's already good like this, right? And regarding Mr. Menders, so the EPP member of the European Parliament that is supposed normally to be rapporteur for this directive. He is quite promising, I have to say. He's been rapporteur for the initiative report that they requested on environmental liability of companies. I think he's made quite a good job to reach out consensus that are not good enough for me, of course, but pretty good in the context of the European Parliament, and which called for the recognition of ecocide in EU law. So we might have a room. He's rapporteur and from EPP, so he hasn't committed to anything, but we have room for discussion. So if we're strong enough in our arguments, we can convince him and maybe its entire party to go in the good direction. And regarding the council, just a few words before Samuel, but we have this international alliance and we are working together, and we also have a network of green ministers that we are of course discussing with. It's not network like we don't have an NGO or anything formal, but we discuss with each other. So it's also going to be one of the levier that we will use.
I'm sorry, because unfortunately I do not have a straight answer to your question. It is, by the way, the topic of a parliamentary question in the parliament. So I will get the official answer very soon, I hope. But maybe two elements. First, there is clearly political will to do so. So to push for the recognition of ecocide also at the European level. There is a large democratic majority in the Belgian parliament. So I think the government would only act in accordance with that very large democratic majority if it were pushing forward that proposal in the EU Council. And second, the Minister of Justice in Belgium has already established an expert panel specifically on the question of ecocides with the General Advocate of the Court of Cassation in Belgium, Damien van der Meersch, who's responsible for that expert panel. So that work has already been, established at the domestic level. So I think it would only be coherent to push forward, more European uniformization of rules regarding the criminalization of ecocide.
Thank you, Samuel. You just answered another question that came online, which was asking specifically about the calendar for that bill that you've introduced. Now, we're running really short on time, and some panelists may need to leave. If you need to leave, please feel free to do so. Those who can stay may want to be interviewed one-on-one by some of the journalists here. I think, unfortunately, Jojo will have to leave. I'd like to take any questions that are addressed to our citizen activists. Anyone?
Well, are there more questions to the parliamentarians? No?
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think, Marie, you said that the prospects of, let's say, winning this fight in the parliament and get a majority depends very much on how ecocide will be defined. And that brings me to my question, I mean, about the amendment of the EU directive. The question is, I mean, I understand the ecocide inside Europe will be criminalized. But the question is also whether European companies, if they commit an ecocide abroad, I mean, in other continents, which is quite common, I think, will that also be covered, you think? Will you fight for that also to be covered, included in the amended directive? Thank you. Understand the question? Yeah.
That's it already in the proposal of the European Commission. There are provisions to ensure that those European companies who are committing crimes abroad, well, outside of EU borders, would be held responsible. So of course we would like for it to concern ecocide as well. We will push a bit further, requesting, well, what we call universal competence for tribunals on the environmental issue. But this is going to be, of course, one of the main political issues in the discussion. And I expect it to be pretty hard already to secure the proposal from the Commission.
Well, we have one question that came online, which I think I can address maybe to the activists here on the panel. What would you hope to be the practical effect of the recognition of ecocide, either in EU law or at the ICC? Is it about punishing those responsible, the CEOs of companies or heads of government, or is it more the deterrent effect that this would really be preventative and stop crimes of ecocide being happening?
I think it's both. I think it's about accountability and the end of impunity that has been going on for way too long. And still to this day, okay, I'm going to give you a very personal example. I was on Saturday at the French climate march, and I was part of a bit of the march, which was marching against ECOP. And ECOP is currently a project by Total to build the largest heated pipeline in the world that would be more than 1,000 kilometers. And that would emit pretty much the equivalent of Denmark's annual emission. And at the same time, that would displace more than 118,000 people. That's the expectations between Uganda and Tanzania. And Total is currently expected to receive funding. I was currently trying to get funding for the pipeline to start working in 2025. So, you know, despite everything that's currently being said, despite commitments, despite pledges, we still see that we're very far from what needs to be achieved. And we're talking about the largest heated pipeline in the world, which is quite something. So I think it's about accountability. That's the first step. And indeed, then to just change society's perspective on what constitutes today, like what are the consequences when you commit an environmental crime. And I think that's also very important, and just ensure that if we have the recognition of ecocides, and indeed CEOs might think twice about their action and about the action of their companies, rather than just go and continue business as usual. So I think there's really, for me, that at least there's definitely two elements there.
Oui, donc nous manifestons depuis 4 ans, en fait, pour que l'Europe et la Belgique prennent des mesures radicales par rapport au changement climatique. mais on se rend compte que, voilà, par exemple, les accords de Paris, une majorité des pays n'ont pas respecté. Donc, je pense que la stratégie aussi de, comment dire, de s'associer avec des juges, voilà, avec la justice, voilà, ce sera plus contraignant, puisqu'on sait que les accords de Paris, finalement, il y a des engagements, mais pas forcément beaucoup de contraintes. Donc, voilà.
So thank you very much. Pierre Galland is leaving us. I think we can wrap up now. I'd just like to give the panelists a chance to make a final closing statement or concluding remarks, but if not, then we'll wrap it up. And thank you very much for attending. Those who can remain are happy to answer any questions you might have one-on-one. So thank you very much, and we look forward to your coverage of our week of action.